We'll start with Ohio State. I don't think anyone expects a step back because they never do for the Buckeyes. But there is a lot of player turnover. There's a lot of coaching turnover, new coordinators on both sides, although, of course, Brian Hartline, very familiar to the Buckeyes. But you go out and bring in Matt Patricia. We've been seeing these NFL coaches coming into college, but he really he has not been there anytime recently. And so this will be an adjustment, of course, for him coming into the college game. You've got a quarterback competition. We've not had a quarterback name. Lost a lot of, kind of senior leadership off of that national championship team. But again, so much talent all over the place. And you still have, I think, who's going to start the season as the best player in college football. Wow, basketball, still in the brain. Best player in college football in Jeremiah Smith. So, Joshua, burning questions for Ohio State and just sort of like what's next?
I think my biggest questions are the coordinators, first off, where, as you mentioned, Brian Hartline's been around there. A couple of years ago, they tried the Brian Hartline as coordinator experiment, and it didn't work out very well for them. And Ryan Day assumed play calling duties, and Brian Hartline went back to work and got more immersed in scheme and figuring out blocking protections and run game and things of that nature that he had to really dive into to become a coordinator. But as we saw from last year with Ohio State, and there's precedent for this, but especially in this day and age of college football, your head coach is best served not being a play caller. There has not been a primary play caller head coach that has won a national title since Jimbo did it in 2013. Okay, so just put that into your mind and understand how important it was that Chip Kelly was there and Ryan Day could CEO the thing. And so Brian Hartline, I think, has to work out for them. And from all the indications, it sounds like things are going well. And then you flip it over to the defense, where Matt Patricia comes in, very highly thought of as a defensive mind. But he's also tasked of kind of running what Ohio State does and not changing things entirely too much, while coaching a group that is going to be relatively inexperienced because they lost a lot of talent on the defensive side of the ball. It's a big offseason for both of those guys in figuring out exactly how they're going to make their mark on Ohio State's program. And so for me, the burning questions are, did you hit on the coordinators? Because we've seen how important that is for Ohio State last year with Chip Kelly and Jim Knowles. They had probably the best coordinator duo in college football.
Yeah, I think a much more secondary question is the quarterback. When is the quarterback competition going to be decided? It looks like it's going to stretch into fall camp, which is nothing new, by the way, for Ohio State. This has happened. But I remember we were there last year in the spring for spring game and talking to Ryan Day about Julian, saying they were really high on him, but he was really raw. He was really young. His body looked young. So interested to get more of a glimpse of him and more insight into where he is. And where that competition is. Regardless, though, I mean, Joshua, as you look with all the turnover from a player personnel, where do you see the strengths? Without knowing who's going to be the quarterback. I mean, you still have Jeremiah Smith, so obviously there's one. But defensively, where are you most confident as we sit here in the spring?
Yeah, I mean, first off, I would look at the offensive line as a group that was embattled last year. I think is going to be a positive for Ohio State this year. And that's important when you have a new quarterback. Certainly the wide receiver group is going to be a big plus as well. On the defensive side of the ball, I like what they have on the top line of their defensive line. I like their starters. I think they're going to be missing the depth that they had a year ago. And we saw how important depth was when you're trying to make a big run into the postseason. And then I look at the linebacker group where you got Sonny Styles back, and that was a huge player to have come back. Arvell Reese was a guy who was a rotational player in that linebacker room last year. I think he could be one of the next great ones as an Ohio State linebacker. So I feel pretty confident in that group there. As you mentioned, with Ohio State, there's always so much talent. There are always young players that are ready to rock and roll. It's just the idea that there are so many new faces that we're going to see this year. And again, we talked about it with Notre Dame. They're getting things started off pretty quick too there in Columbus at the beginning of the year. So they're going to have things figured out by the time camp ends.
Right. And listen, this is where you try to learn from maybe your biggest rival, right? So Michigan, all the guys came back. They were super veteran loaded. They win a national championship and it was rough last year, right? I mean, ultimately by the end, Michigan fans are happy, because it's like the greatest 8-win season ever because they beat Ohio State and they beat Alabama to end it.
Right.
But that transition, when you go from like everybody came back to what's next, can be really tough. And so there will definitely be some growing pains, and as you know, everyone gets up to speed. But like you said, get started with a big challenge right out of the gate.